You know, when you hear Juarez Cartel, it brings a pretty chilling picture to mind, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about a group known for just, well, extreme brutality.
Yeah, the decapitations, the mutilations,
Mhm.
leaving bodies out in public. It wasn't just violence, it was theater designed to terrify.
Exactly. A calculated message of fear, not random, but a strategy.
Oh.
Horrifying, really.
And you're probably listening because you want to understand this stuff, get the real story on complex groups like this, but, quickly and clearly.
Cut through the noise, yeah.
Yeah.
Get the essential information without getting lost in, like, endless details.
Precisely. So in this deep dive, we're zeroing in on the Juarez Cartel. We've got source material covering their history, how they operated, their alliances, the whole picture.
And the goal here is basically to trace their origins, see how they changed, who the key people were, their methods, and, well, where they are now.
Right, and what their story tells us about the bigger picture, the whole landscape of Mexican drug cartels.
Because their rise and fall, it's not just about them. It shows patterns you see again and again, the power struggles, the ruthlessness, how things are always changing.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The founding. We're looking at 1970.
And some key names involved right from the start. Rafael Aguilar Guajardo, Pablo Acosta Villarreal, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, and his brother Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, too.
Names that would become, well, infamous in the drug trade world.
And their base, Ciudad Juarez. That location is critical.
Right across from El Paso, Texas.
Exactly. A perfect pipeline straight into the U.S. market. That geography was fundamental to their early power. You just can't overstate its importance.
And they weren't small time for long. Our info says they quickly dominated central Mexico, controlled a huge chunk of cocaine heading north.
A staggering amount, yeah. Which tells you something about how quickly they established control, probably through a mix of efficiency and, let's face it, corruption.
That seems likely. And the leadership, it changed hands pretty quickly and violently early on.
Yeah. Pablo Acosta Villarreal was killed in '87.
Then Rafael Aguilar Guajardo took over. But then in '93, betrayal.
Amado Carrillo Fuentes took out Guajardo to seize control himself. Ruthless.
It really shows you how unstable the top spot is in that world. Betrayal is almost like standard operating procedure.
It is. And Amado Carrillo Fuentes, he's a really significant figure. As Señor de los Cielos, Lord of the Skies.
Because of his fleet of planes, right. But the source also mentions his connections, specifically a top drug interdiction general.
Division General Jesus Gutierrez Rebollo.
Yeah.
Having someone that high up in your pocket, I mean, that shows you the level of corruption they were dealing with.
It's incredible. It highlights the massive challenge for law enforcement when the rot goes that deep.
Absolutely. When the system meant to stop you is compromised from within.
But Amado's time at the very top wasn't actually that long in the grand scheme of things. His death in 1997.
After complications from plastic surgery trying to change his appearance.
Yeah, and that's pinpointed as the moment the cartel really started its decline. Kind of ironic, isn't it? His ambition leading to the downfall.
It really is. And his death created this huge power vacuum, which, as always happens, leads to chaos.
And chaos is what they got. A short, nasty turf war kicked off right after.
Eventually, Amado's brother, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, came out on top. He had to fight for it, though. Took out the Muñoz Talavera brothers.
So even weakened, they weren't finished. Vicente managed to hold things together, at least for a while.
He did, and he was smart enough to know he needed help. He started building alliances.
Right. The source lists some major players he linked up with. Juan Jose Esparagoza Moreno, his own brother, Rodolfo, his nephew, Vicente Carrillo Leyva, Ricardo Garcia Urquiza.
And beyond his immediate circle, too. Alliances with guys like Ismael Mayo Zambada, the Beltran Leyva brothers, even Joaquin El Chapo Guzman initially.
That's like a who's who of the Mexican underworld in the late 90s, early 2000s.
That shows how interconnected it all is.
Yeah.
Cartels cooperate when it suits them, sharing routes, intel, whatever.
Yeah.
But those deals are built on sand, you know?
Yeah, because that leads us to the Golden Triangle Alliance.
Yeah.
Chihuahua, Durango, Sinaloa. Sounds powerful.
Supposed to be. But it fell apart pretty quickly.
Why? What happened?
Money, basically.
Mm.
Guzman and the Sinaloa cartel refused to pay the Juarez cartel tolls for using their routes into the U.S.
So classic business dispute, just with, deadly consequences.
Pretty much. And that refusal, that was Guzman basically saying, we're strong enough now, we don't need to play by your rules anymore. It set the stage for war.
Direct challenge. And things really heated up after 2001, right? When El Chapo escaped prison the first time.
Yeah, that was a major turning point. A lot of Juarez cartel members actually flipped, went over to Sinaloa.
That's a huge blow. Losing people, losing influence to your main rival.
It showed where the momentum was shifting. People saw Sinaloa as the rising power, maybe safer, maybe more profitable.
Then in 2004, it got really personal. Vicente's brother, Rodolfo, was killed. The source says allegedly on Guzman's orders.
Vicente hit back.
Hey.
Had Guzman's brother killed in prison.
Wow. So it moved beyond business disputes to straight-up family vendettas. That guarantees a long, bloody fight.
Absolutely. That kind of attack locks in the hatred. No going back.
Interestingly, there was a bit of a pause in their direct conflict around 2005, 2006.
Right. Because Sinaloa got tied up in a huge war with the Gulf cartel. It's like they had to prioritize their fights.
Shows you how fluid it is. One war temporarily pauses another, enemies of my enemy sort of thing.
Exactly. But it was just temporary. Sinaloa eventually turned its attention back to Juarez.
And started taking over their territory.
Yeah, significantly. Sinaloa absorbed a lot of the areas Juarez used to control. The tide really turned against the Carrillo Fuentes organization.
But Juarez didn't just roll over. They kept using their old tactics, bribery, intimidation.
Corruption, yeah. Trying to use influence with officials to get intel, get protection. It was baked into their strategy.
And their reach, even as they weakened, was still pretty wide. The source says they operated in, 21 Mexican states? Major cities, too?
They still had networks, logistical capability. They weren't gone overnight.
But then there's the darker stuff. Even beyond the usual violence, the House of Death in Juarez.
Discovered in 2004. A serial murder site linked to the cartel.
No.
Just horrific. Shows the absolute depths they'd sink to.
A truly grim reminder of the human cost. And the fight for Juarez itself, their home turf, got incredibly intense from 2007 onwards.
Thousands died in Chihuahua State alone, fighting the Sinaloa cartel for control of that crucial border city.
That plaza, that crossing point, is just so valuable. Worth killing thousands for, apparently.
Tragically, yes. Control the city, control the flow of drugs and money.
And they used specific enforcement gangs to fight that war, right? La Línea.
Which was made up of corrupt current and former police officers, a terrifying blend of state power and criminal violence.
And Barria Azteca.
A street gang, but operating on both sides of the border. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, gives them reach right into the U.S.
That combination, corrupt cops and a cross-border street gang, is pretty formidable.
Definitely. But the violence kept escalating. 2010, they used a car bomb against federal police.
A car bomb? That's a major escalation, almost like terrorist tactics.
It showed a new level of desperation, maybe. A willingness to hit back hard against the state itself.
There was that moment in 2011, some public displays, banners and things, suggesting a comeback under Cesar El Gato Carrillo Leyva.
Seemed like it might be a resurgence, yeah. But looking back, it feels more like posturing. Trying to project strength they didn't quite have anymore.
Because the scale they once operated on was just massive. Billions of dollars in drugs crossing into the U.S. every year back in their heyday.
Before Sinaloa really took over those routes, yeah. The sheer amount of money involved is hard to comprehend. It fuels everything.
Then came the big arrests. Alberto Carrillo Fuentes, Ugly Betty, in 2013. He'd supposedly taken over because Vicente was ill.
That was the report, yeah. And then Vicente himself was captured in 2014.
Taking out the top leadership like that must have really shaken the organization further.
Oh, undoubtedly. Creates instability, more internal fighting, weakens their ability to operate effectively.
There's that weird side note, too, the government auctioning off Amato's mansion.
Yeah, his luxury villa. They said the money would go to public health. Symbolic, maybe, but interesting.
Turning narco cash into something positive, I guess.
An attempt, at least.
So looking at the bigger picture, since around 2010, the source talks about these loose alliances forming. Juarez kind of ended up grouped with Tijuana, Las Cedas, Beltran Leyva against Sinaloa, basically.
Right. The major players seem to align into two rough camps, often based on who their biggest enemy was, but again, very fluid alliances.
And the old grudges clearly linger. In 2019, El Chapo apparently put a bounty on the head of the current Juarez leader, Juan Pablo Ledesma.
Even from prison, the rivalries continue. Shows you how deep that conflict runs.
By 2018, though, it was clear Juarez had lost its dominance in Ciudad Juarez itself.
Yeah, their grip on their home city was significantly weaker, a major sign of their decline.
As of mid-2020, La Línea was still considered their strongest faction there, but Sinaloa's guys, the Los Salazar cell, were also very present.
And even the Jalisco New Generation Cartel tried to muscle in but failed. So it's a fragmented picture now. Very contested territory.
It's not like Sinaloa just walked in and took everything uncontested either. It's still violent, still unstable.
Precisely. No single group seems to have total control there now.
And finally, it's interesting how the Juarez cartel pops up in media, right? Movies like Traffic, shows like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, Narcos, Mexico.
Documentaries, too, like La Frontera. Even Tom Clancy novels.
Yeah, Against All Enemies had a fictional leader. The Bridge had Fausto Galvan. Their story, or versions of it, clearly resonates.
I think it's the drama, the violence, the power. It captures the imagination, even if the portrayals aren't always, completely accurate. But it does bring awareness to the issue.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've seen the Juarez cartel rise up, leverage that border location, make alliances, reach this peak under Amado Carrillo Fuentes.
Then the decline after his death. Internal fights, the bloody war with Sinaloa, losing territory, key leaders arrested.
Their methods were brutal, designed for fear. Their reach was huge for a time now. Much diminished, especially in Juarez, but still present, still part of that violent, fragmented landscape.
Yeah, La Linea still operates. The rivalry with Sinaloa continues. It's a complex, ongoing story.
And you wanted the essentials, the key takeaways from this complex history, and hopefully we've kind of unpacked that for you.
It really is a classic story of the cycles of power and organized crime, isn't it? Rise, dominance, decline, often violent decline.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe. Given that cycle, even though the Juarez cartel is weaker, what does its history tell us about what might come next? Could they resurge? Or is it just inevitable that new groups rise to take the place of the old ones?
That's the big question, isn't it? And what about the lasting impact? The scars left on communities in Mexico and the effects felt here in the U.S. too.
And maybe, what does our fascination with these stories in movies and TV say about us? About how we understand power, crime, and fear, something to think about.